Hello, welcome everybody. My name is Jeremiah Robison. I'm the CTO of Slide. A couple housekeeping items before we get started on the presentation. For those of you who really wanted to see the surprisingly rocking JavaScript and DOM programming in GWT, it's actually happening right now. They've rescheduled it for room 9. There's one guy who's leaving off to that session. We have also added a repeat session of Under the Covers of the Google App Engine Data Store, which will happen at 3:15 in room 8. All of these sessions, excluding the fireside chats, will be posted by mid-next week on the Google I/O website. Please remember to fill out your evaluation forms and leave them in the collection bin. All right, so OpenSocial, building on the promise. OpenSocial was designed to let you build an application and run it just about everywhere. For a lot of people, that's an ideal scenario. But one thing that I like to keep in mind is that every social network is different. People may or may not be throwing sheep at one another on LinkedIn later this year. We'll have to see. How many of you people here are application developers? All right, excellent. How many of you people are writing applications now on Facebook? Just a few. And for those of you who are looking at building applications for OpenSocial, do you have a target network in how many people, MySpace, the target network for you guys? All right. How about LinkedIn? All right. High Five. Orkut. All right, so there's a lot of containers out there that I'm not sure where you guys are targeting, but I'll get some of those from you guys later on today. For Slide, we've been in the business of building social networking applications for about 3 years now. Our first applications showed up on MySpace. They were slideshows. There are very few hooks into the social network data. No access to friends, no access to their activities. What people did was they uploaded photos and they put them on their page. Someone saw it, they liked it, they would do that. That's virality without the viral channels. When Facebook came along, it's now just celebrated its 1-year anniversary. We had a whole new opportunity to access social networking data, friends, communications between those friends, and actually we're able to take our applications and spread them in unique and interesting ways, leveraging that channel. We did Super Poke, people throw sheep. It's a light flirting communication, stab each other, and then we built an application called Top Friends. Top Friends was actually an overlay on top of the social graph, which is who are the people who are most important to you. It was a concept that was on other social networks but wasn't on Facebook at the time. Then we moved on to doing Funwall. Funwall is one where it's a media discovery, videos, photos, things that people like and want to send around to other people. And through these different applications, we're now slideshows, for example. We serve over 1 billion images a day. On Funwall, we're doing tens of millions of posts per day. These are big numbers, and that's what the power of social networking gives you. Now we have an opportunity with OpenSocial to take that to a whole new level. An application that you write once can now go onto all of these different social networks, and you can then share your message, whatever that happens to be, with all of those different users. And there's even opportunities now to do an application that can leverage users across social networks. So what I want to take you through is how we at Slide build these applications. For us, we like to build a number of different applications that are on a bunch of different social networks. To do this, we have to create a scalable, network-agnostic backend. This is really important from the standpoint of you want your own notion of a user, and you want to be able to leverage that notion of a user across the different networks. We've built a reusable JavaScript application framework. And the key, which I think gets glossed over quite a lot, is that you want to customize your application for each container. This doesn't mean rewrite your application in each container. However, if you did have the resources and the energy, you may actually want to do that because that would provide you with the most custom experience for each social network. Now, each social network is different. And that's a really important thing to keep in mind. So the scalable network agnostic backend, again, I talk about all these different social networks that we target, and you can look at just the OpenSocial, Orkut, High Five, MySpace. They account for over 6% of pages viewed on the internet every day. That's a lot of pages. You're going to have to be able to scale. If your application takes off, if the message resonates with people, you can have a whole lot of users really quickly. You add in Facebook on top of that and some of the other social networks, and you're talking upwards of 10% of pages viewed on the internet every day. So I'm going to take you through some code, how we set up our architecture, give you some ideas of how we like to do things, and then I'll take some questions at the end. So the first thing that we do is we've created a generic OpenSocial command. This is responsible for only a few things: translating OpenSocial IDs to our own internal representation of IDs. So you see the user ID and OSU ID, they're sort of the back and forth mapping of those. And then in the execute call, which happens every time a page gets loaded, we grab the network and the application, we check the security, and then set the language. So localization is something that's also really important as you start to think about your users on these different social networks. So I just dumped some of the tables and killed out some of the actual numbers to show what I'm talking about in terms of user abstraction. So if you think about a user on your site, now for some people, their OpenSocial applications are an accessory to a core business. For some people like Slide, it is the business. But you still have a single user that may have a presence on various different social networks. And I had someone ask me this yesterday, well, how do I sync them all up? Well, what we've done is we've done a user alias mapping. And that mapping is from a string ID, which is an OpenSocial ID. Now, that may be an email address. It may be a numeric ID. It may be some other hash of the network that the network chooses. We take that, we hash it down into a number so that it's more easily indexable, and then enter the data into our MySQL database. And what we do is, how we scale that is we have that split, and we split it with mappings so that when you have a single database, all the entries from range 0 to infinity go to that single one. And you create a second layer when you're ready to expand, and you do a fallback. So you take your hash space, you mod on the last digit, if that makes sense for you guys, split it between the databases. Don't find it in the first layer. Go back to the second layer, and you can add layers on top of that. We like to do it in powers of 2 and grow it outwards. User alias map for us is the opposite direction. When you have an internal representation of a user and you need to translate it out to one of these networks, where does that come into play? So say you have a user at your site and they want to share with their friends on Facebook. You need to look up their user ID on Facebook or on MySpace or on High Five and share that way. Security. Anyone who's been building OpenSocial applications knows that security is a big issue. You have your users on a different site. You don't have complete control over the session key, so you have to have a model for security. This was the big sticking point of launching the first versions of OpenSocial. We had to have a way to verify those calls. We're using OAuth. There are different security methods. And that's just one of the things that we like to abstract up into our base class so that the application logic itself doesn't have to deal with it. So every call, once it gets down to the logic layer, we know it to be verified. Localization. I can't stress this enough. As we discovered in our early days of writing applications, language makes a big difference. I mean, not everyone speaks English, and people have different abilities to cope with that. And as we concentrated on localization, we found that we were able to really expand our audience. What we do here is we have a single language object that we inherit from. So our English language object is our base, and Spanish inherits from English, and then we have Spanish Catalan, which inherits from Spanish. And so this just allows for you, if you do have strings in your application, as many of you will be iterating very quickly on your applications, you'll be adding things in English and then backfilling into the different languages. It just gives you something so that you at least have something that works. So The really interesting part about OpenSocial is not only is it a framework for providing you access to the social networking data, but it also somewhat dictates a programming model. Now things are changing a little bit in 08 where with the introduction of the REST calls, which allows you to do a more traditional page view of applications. But the evolution of more of a client-server architecture in terms of building applications is somewhat dictated by OpenSocial. So have your logic in JavaScript, make calls for data to your servers, and then render client-side. Let me take you through what we've done to set up an application framework that allows you to have the basic calls and then quickly sub in new application logics as you want to build more applications, and also how it allows you to do customization per network. So this is our base OpenSocial class. A couple of things to point out here. It's just a sampling of what we have in the application. So the getJSON call is for getting data out from our own servers. And what you can see here on this first line is that we're actually constructing a domain. And that domain takes the application name and the site being MySpace or High5, and then concatenating it with slide.com. This allows us to do a really easy load balance for our application. So as one social network gets big, if your application starts taking off in that social network, you can partition more of your servers towards that network or towards that application even. Just a very simple method, and it actually also helps you for diagnosing errors. What we have is on a certain set of our web machines, we have really detailed logging, so we can switch traffic over to that through our load balancers because the domain is mapped, and just do some debugging on there. You see there what in the JavaScript, in the traditional programming world, you might call pure virtual functions. When you go to get the site from the base class, it alerts. It's runtime debugging, and as well as the application. So our application logic class, I built an application called Flattery Box for this demo. On some of the social networks, you've seen a very popular application. There are various different names for it: honesty box, truth box, brutal truth. Something about this world makes people want to anonymously communicate with other people and tell them what they really think. And since I got tired of people calling me a big nerd on my honesty box, I decided I'd call it Flattery Box, hoping to encourage the people to do the right thing. So JavaScript is not well set up to do inheritance, but there's a lot of methods out there that provide for a mechanism to do inheritance. In a workshop earlier yesterday, I talked about using the OpenSocial calls to do supports feature. So if it supports this feature, then do this. If it supports this feature, it does this. It helps you to not do if-else cases. Well, in my experience as a programmer, there's another method that allows you to do that, and that's inheritance. So if you have an application and you want to change, you have a basic application and you want to customize it for a network, it's not just what features it supports. There also may be differences in the network itself. So here, the logic class inherits from the OpenSocial class, and you can see that for the app, it actually returns a value. So now we're halfway there. We've got the application built. And on the initialize function, it goes and gets some JSON from it and does the display. And here's what I was talking about for doing some inheritance, some further inheritance on the network object. So a full application is a network, it's an application, and it's the power of OpenSocial. Add those three together, you actually have something that runs on the net. So for this, since I was focused on MySpace originally to build this application, all my logic was tailored towards MySpace, and I just have to return the network type. So now that I have an application running, I want to do some customization. Again, different networks behave in different ways. The users are different. So it's important to keep that in mind when you're building out an application. First thing that I do is use CSS. You want your application to blend into the container. OpenSocial has recently introduced the concept of skins. It was first available on High5. It would allow your profile boxes to get the CSS styles of the container itself, of High5. So you'd get, the colored backgrounds, the fancy scrolling stars across the top of the header box, and it really does look more like it is a part of the container. And that's really important because that's what users expect. You have a white box or a black box just sitting in the middle of a page that they've spent so much time customizing, it can really be a jarring experience. So if you don't have the skin available, or if the container doesn't provide for it, you can use CSS to customize the look and feel of that application. So here, these are the styles for, I wish I had written it down. It's either Orchid or High5. We just grabbed their colors, the fonts, and copied their link colors. So the vanilla program looks like a vanilla Orchid profile. And then the second is to override application methods. Now, this is an artificial example, but when I made the Orchid flattery box, I decided that people on Orchid really wanted their photos on the right side. So I overrode the RenderList prototype and just called the same functions for displaying the username and the text and the photos, and just mixed up the order. And what about other containers? For a lot of us in the application space, OpenSocial containers are not the only social networks that we want to target. There are social networks that, for whatever reason, maybe they have a small dev team and they haven't been able to integrate Shindig or any of the or actually build out the OpenSocial container themselves, but they want the applications. And the clear obvious one is Facebook. Today it's not an OpenSocial container, and for a lot of people who are building applications, they want to take their applications from OpenSocial out to Facebook and vice versa. The question I asked myself was, can I leverage the programming model, and can I create an application experience that was common, customizable, and worked across different social networks without a lot of trouble? So what I did was I took the JavaScript data functions. The primary ones that I looked at were the getJSON call and the fetchPeople call. Now, fetchPeople on OpenSocial grabs data directly in JavaScript from the container. So what I did was I said, well, I've got a server-to-server API with Facebook that allows me to grab friend data. Why don't I just override my fetchPeople call to call up to my own servers, make the API call to Facebook, and bring back down the data. So you can see what I did was for my JSON calls, I had to create the idea of a viewer. It didn't come from the container itself. What I did was I passed that as a parameter. When I render my initial page, what would be the equivalent of the gadget XML, I just sort of created a duplicate of that and created a new authentication mechanism, which I called session, and I created a session token for these users and passed that down. So, and I make a new XML HTTP request to my own servers rather than proxied through the OpenSocial make request. And then I added the security method on our servers just as an additional method to validate the session, make sure that we're secure. And then I implemented server-to-server APIs. So in the end, what I had was, for the friend request, was a call that to the JavaScript looked identical to our application, to the application logic, to the application class. The friend data looked exactly the same as it did when it made the call to the OpenSocial container. So let me just show you what that looks like. So it turns out MySpace launched this Flattery box, and my friends were very kind. They said, "You rock, throw me a sheep." And then on Facebook, I had this as well. Turns out they still think that I'm a big nerd. But this is the same application logic code with different network backend that's leveraging the same programming model. Client-server programming model, making calls to a data source and rendering using JavaScript. Where is this important? Well, for us, small team, we have a large number of products. We want to support them across multiple social networks. There are some details that are different. So for any of you who have built Facebook applications, that's, you have FBML, and FBML is something that you have to use in certain areas of the site. However, there's a bunch of your logic and your presentation that you can share. And so taking the programming model and layering on different customizations for network, overriding different methods, allows you to get the most impact for your IT budget, as I would like to say. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and go back to questions and let you guys ask any questions you guys have about how we build applications and what sort of things to look for. Questions?
You mentioned FBML on Facebook versus JavaScript on others. So do you have a layer of abstraction, or do you have a slide ML or these things on that as well?
So the question was, how do you abstract the specifics of the markup language? So the difference being FBML for Facebook and JavaScript and HTML for OpenSocial. So we are not currently doing any abstraction on top of that. We have customization, just basic overrides for the application to set markup. Where that can be interesting with OpenSocial 09, they're targeting to release a markup language there as well, a templating language, which allows you to write an application in a templating language, which would be very similar to FBML. So from there, you may actually do a translation language of sorts to translate between an internal representation of a user out to FB image or FB username, or whatever the resulting templating language is for OpenSocial.
I'm fairly certain that Slide has several Flash widgets that you use for slideshows. Mm-hmm. I was wondering how you found ways to authenticate from within ActionScript within an OpenSocial container when script access is often turned off.
So right now, we're doing all of our authentication through JavaScript. So our Flash objects actually call out to a JavaScript bridge, and then the JavaScript bridge makes calls through make request. And so right now, we haven't done anything where we're actually calling directly from the Flash to our servers, except in the case where we're getting data that we already have as public access.
So if your SWIP happens to be submitted as part of an OpenSocial application, do you have control over the script access? Because if that's set to false, you can't communicate with JavaScript through external interface unless you're using a different method.
Currently on the networks that we're on, there is they've distinguished between Flash that is embedded, which doesn't have script access, to they've distinguished that from Flash that is part of an OpenSocial application. Flash that's as part of OpenSocial application, it's running in an iframe, so they do allow script access to your own calls, basically. So you're sandboxed inside the iframe.
Okay, and then, so you make calls to helper JavaScript functions that then call the OpenSocial API?
That's correct.
You can't call OpenSocial API directly then?
We are not in any cases calling OpenSocial APIs directly from our Flash.
Have you by chance published that library?
I'm sorry?
Have you by chance published the library that you're using to do that?
We haven't, but I'll look into it.
Okay, thanks.
Sure. Any other questions?
Just quick question. What are your thoughts on? It would seem to me, I mean, the way that OpenSocial is structured, when you're developing an OpenSocial app and looking to develop an OpenSocial app, to instead, until the RESTful interface comes into place on a few more sites, to develop your Facebook apps through the Facebook client library rather than through the RESTful library. What are your thoughts on that? And would you recommend going that way, or continuing using the REST interface Facebook provides?
It sort of depends on your goals. The question, well, you're on the mic, so I don't have to repeat. We've used FBJS on a few occasions to try and emulate some of the experience, but I think the model is somewhat new for a lot of web developers of doing a pure AJAX-based application. So right now I think a lot of developers, ourselves included, are more comfortable in the REST world. It mimics what we do every day when we're building our site, right? We make a call to our servers package up all the data really nicely, one call comes back. I believe that the future of web applications as well as social networking applications is to move to more of the client-server model. So it depends on what the competency of your staff is. You can make a very clean, very fast-running application if you're willing to put in the extra work to do an AJAX interface. What we've seen is, in the case of OpenSocial, if we were going to move to the REST APIs, there are some areas that would slow down and some areas that would speed up. I can give you a concrete example of that. In the MySpace container, a lot of the user data is actually cached locally, so that when we go to make a call to get the viewer's name or their ID or their photo, it actually doesn't do a round trip to the server. It actually picks it up directly from the client-side store. And so if we're to move to the REST API, we do have to then do a round trip to our server, to their server, and back, and that can slow it down. Conversely, getting a list of friends is not cached. So right now, when we go to get our data for that list of photos that I showed, what we have to do is we go to our servers first to get the list of data back, and then we make a call out to get people data by the IDs of the photos that are in that list, which then does a round trip to their servers and comes back. So now you have 2 round trips rather than 1, and that could be sped up by doing it on the server side.
That's been a huge headache for me, because basically you've got, by having to do one model and integrate with the other model, the Google model is doing a lot of the application and controller logic on the client itself, on the view actually, and whereas Facebook is doing a lot of that on the server, and mixing the two is really hard to do. I was curious what your methods of approaching that were, and I think you've covered it well. I appreciate it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. The really interesting part was the whole idea of using the OpenSocial model to call back to Facebook was more of an experiment than anything else. And we have, tens of millions of active users now on Facebook. It's going to take time for us to massage anything other than just our back-end layers into a model that's shared. But it's an interesting thought experiment if you're starting new, or if you have the opportunity to do something unique there. Any more questions? All right, thank you.